Well guys, today's the day. Because the engine bay on the GTO has been empty for a while. So today is the day we get this 3-litre twin turbo V6 and this 5-speed Getrag manual gearbox back in the engine bay. And hopefully if we've got everything we need and we've done everything right, we'll get the first start in this video, because this GTO hasn't ran properly for a good 14 years. What I mean by that is, when I got the car, I did get it running, but it had severe rod knock. It sounded horrendous and there was a lot of problems with it. But when I took this engine out, I said to myself, I'm not putting it back in that state for it to do the exact same thing, or even worse. So over the span of a year, I've spent my time, energy and money rebuilding that engine to fix the problems it had, to make it run a lot better, and also to clean it up because it looked like it had been dug up. And I don't think I've done too bad considering the state it was in. And if you're curious to see the state the engine was in, I've done a whole build series on it in the top right hand corner now, so go click that link, it'll take you to the playlist and you can see every video from when we first stripped it down to where it is now. But in terms of fitting the engine back into the car, I actually don't know where to start with this. But where better to start than on the engine itself, so what I'll do is we'll go around the engine, we'll double check everything. There's a few things we need to put back on it, but we've also got the clutch, which can't go in until the gearbox is on, so we'll leave that there for now. But in these two boxes are two turbos for the engine, which again is in the top right hand corner on that playlist, because I tried to get funky and rebuild the old ones, but it kind of didn't work. One of them's still on the back, so we need to take that off. We'll get that off first and we'll go from there. So the turbos on the GTO have 4 hoses going to the centre cartridges. 2 are for the coolant and 2 are for the oil. 1 in, 1 out for both. We need to get both of them off to make sure we can get the turbo off. Then disconnect the downpipe so we can pull it away from the engine without bringing that with us. And then we need to disconnect the oil return, which is underneath. I changed these for braided hoses, thinking that they were a nice little upgrade, but the hoses were too long, so when I fitted them there was a big kink in it, which would then probably stop the oil from going back to the oil pan. So we're going to stick the old ones back on because there's nothing wrong with them really. So now that the old rear turbo's off, we can finally open these boxes and get the new rear turbo and the new front turbo out, because that front manifold is ready for the turbo. That rear manifold is ready for the turbo. I have got some braided coolant lines as well, but I haven't put the fronts on yet because the turbos aren't on. So let's get them on. And here's the shiny new turbos. I did notice a bit of a problem with one of them, but we'll get onto that later. So here's the brand new turbos. That one is for the rear because it's got the bolt on the top. That one's for the front because it's a different type of mounting for the intake. And you'd even get brand new turbo gaskets. One for the manifold, one for the downpipe, one for the oil return that goes underneath, and a little circle one which you need to figure out where it goes. I think it's something to do with the coolant lines on the top, but I'll have to double check. They've even been kind enough to give you some installation instructions, so when they blow up it's not their fault. So all that's left to do now is get those shiny new turbos on the engine. First goes on the ring gasket, then the turbo gasket, and then the turbo. Fitting the new turbo is basically the reverse of what you've just seen to remove the old turbo, but I'll show you it anyway. So now the turbo's bolted on, it's back on with the braided coolant lines and the oil lines, and we've got to make sure that these are nice and tight because we're not taking these back off. So that's the rear turbo on with the coolant return line, the coolant feed line, the oil feed line. The downpipe is on. I do need to put another bolt in there because there's studs. I don't want to have a stud that will fit, but I'll do that in a bit. But underneath the turbo, you can see this here is where the oil feed, the oil return pipe goes. That's that one on the floor there. So we need to get a gasket on there with the pipe that goes from there down and back into the sump. We'll get that back on. We'll get the rear heat shield on. Then that's the rear turbo finished. I'll fit the front because it's the same thing, and then we can carry on. So now I'm fitting the original turbo oil return lines to the turbo because the upgrade wasn't really an upgrade, but I suppose they do say they don't make them like they used to. And that is the brand new rear turbo fitted to the engine. So that's the rear turbo now on. We'll get the heat shield on, and I think she's looking a lot better. That heat shield's only loose because I'll have to come back off so I can redo the top bolt, but we'll get the front turbo on the front of the engine. So the front turbo's on, and I'll be honest with you, it took me a lot longer than I'm proud to admit, but I did notice something a bit weird about it. So there it is, looks pretty good in my opinion anyway. I also got the little downpipe on from the turbo itself, but realised here and on the opposite side should be a coolant channel. This turbo doesn't have channels for the coolant, so what I've had to do is on the 2 coolant pipes, that one there and that one there, I've had to loop them with a bit of metal hose, obviously because of the heat off the turbos and stuff, to make sure the coolant comes out there and goes back in so it don't get leaks. But with it not being water cooled, that means it's going to be relying on the oil feed to cool it down. And although the GTO does have an oil cooler, I'm a bit worried that that turbo might get a bit too hot, but I don't know. So if you do know, and you do actually know, let me know down in the comment section below whether or not this is going to be okay, because it does worry me a little bit. But one of the positive things is it's on the front of the engine, so when it's in the car like so, you'll be here and the turbo will sit around about there, meaning if I ever need to take it back out, I can. Be a bit fiddly, but better than the back, because the rear turbo would be so much worse. But looking at it, the engine's not doing too bad in terms of being ready to go back in the car. So I know there's a few little pipes you need to throw back on, like the coolant pipes. They can go on when the engine's in, along with the overflow tap. There's a few vacuum lines that need to go in, but they can go in when the car's in, the engine's in the car. Then on the back, there's these are the coolant lines I'm referring to for the front turbo. So there's one, there's two, that goes to the bottom one there, that one goes to there. And on the back, you can see on the housing, you've got one on one side and one on the other, with the oil feed being in the top and the oil return being down the bottom. So I'm hoping maybe the front turbo is a better engineering design than the old one, so it doesn't need the water cooling system, but I don't actually know. I'm just going to run it for now, and if it works, it works, but I don't want that to go and take the engine with it. So again, if you do know, please let me know down below in the comment section. And I suppose while you're down there, you might as well hit the subscribe button to keep up to date with the GTO build, the TT, which is just behind me, and the new future build, which I am going to release very soon. I'm just trying to get the video edited, so I want to make it right. But I'm going to take another once over the engine, see what it is I need to get on now before I can get it paired up with the gearbox, with the new clutch, and get it back in the car. I'll be honest, I think we're pretty much ready to get the engine in. What scares me is getting it in and then realising I've forgotten something. I can always take it back out. I'd rather didn't have to though. But if we do a once over on the engine, you've got your heater matrix pipes, you've got your fuel lines, which is your in and your out, I believe. All your coolant lines for the turbo are connected up. That one down there is linked, like I said, because the front turbo doesn't have coolant for some bizarre reason. All those connectors are free and you're able to get to them, which is good. This, I know that is for a knock sensor, but I don't know where it goes yet, so I'll figure that out. This is a vacuum line, you can get to that from the top. What else? These are vacuum lines for the rear, and if you go into the engine bay, you can see there's the solenoids for the vacuum line, so that's good, that's right. The turbos are both on, as we know. The positive crankcase pipes, they're on, but you can get to them outside anyway. The front turbo, everything's on, the alternator's on. The only thing left really is the aircon pipe, so I might put them on now, so when they're in the engine bay, I'm not struggling getting down past all of this to get them connected. But one thing I'm going to do right now, just to make things a bit easier, is take the one passenger side fender off, or wing, whatever you want to call it, and the front bumper, that can come off as well, because it gives us a bit more of a reach over, and we'll need to get in behind the bumper to put like the intercoolers, the radiators, the aircon rad, stuff like that. That all goes behind the bumper along with a lot of connectors, so we need to get rid of that so we can get access to the back. And there it is, everything's off. One thing I probably could have done with was taking the bonnet off, but I think what I'll do is these little gas struts, I think I'll just disconnect them from the top on both sides, and I'll swing the bonnet as far back as I can and pin it to the roof. One thing I think I'll do first actually is the plenum, the intake plenum. I think we're best putting that on with the throttle body, because it can be a little bit fiddly in the engine bay, because I have done it before. Oh, can it? Yeah, we'll put it on. It's going to need to come back off anyway to get polished up, because I do want to polish it, but I think for the sake of this and to stop anything falling in the engine, we'll stick the plenum and the throttle body on, because it's a safer option, and that way when we come to start it, it's one less thing we have to do inside the engine bay. So the first thing we'll do is take all this tissue out. We don't need it anymore. Then we'll get a brand new gasket on. Came with the gasket kit I got. Press it in. Nice and flat. Now we'll get the plenum over. Like I said, it's not the way I wanted it to look, so it's a bit dirty, but We'll get it off at some point in the future, polish it up and stick back on. But for now, this will do the job. So the plenum's on, there's 2 nuts either side, 5 bolts in the middle, 2 bolts at the back, and this little bracket thing that bolts up here, like so. So we'll get all that bolted up and then we're good to go. So I remember when I first took this plenum off, and now it's weird to be putting it back on knowing that the whole engine's being rebuilt. It's quite the achievement for me because it's the first engine I've fully rebuilt, but now I just hope it starts and now I've done everything right. But if you're liking this build series so far, hit the subscribe button down below and go check out the playlist for the engine build because we go through everything. And if you hit the subscribe, you'll be able to see if it actually starts or if it goes boom. So now that the plenum and the throttle body are back on, you can see this absolute junction of vacuum lines. This line here is actually damaged, it was when I took it off, so I'm going to replace that to there. I'm then going to replace that from there to there, and then I'm going to have to figure out where this goes to because this is for the, I don't know if you can see it, but for the fuel rail. So now the vacuum lines are being done and we've replaced the 2 that were cracked, put some new clips on. We need to now get the coolant lines on the bottom of the throttle body, and that is literally the last thing I can do to the engine whilst it's on the stand, so then we can get the clutch in, get it on the gearbox and get it back in there. So I've removed the gas struts from either side of the bonnet, and I've also got the bonnet up and ratchet strapped it to the I-beam in the middle of the unit. It didn't make much of a difference, but it probably gives us about an extra inch in terms of getting stuff in without having to take the bonnet off, because I really don't want to have to do that. And this is literally being an all-day job because it's going dark, so I need to try and get it in the unit as best I can. Because obviously at night the lighting outside is not great, so the video quality won't be the best. I decided to take the bonnet off because even with the bonnet on, you had a bit of clearance, but the lighting was terrible and you couldn't see anything in the engine bay. So for the sake of the video on the YouTube, to make it as best a quality as I can, I decided to take it off, and they're not like bonnets. But that now means I can clean up out there and get the engine on the crane, get the gearbox on, and then we can get it in. I think I must have said that about 3 times in this video. But anyway, out here is now clean and the engine is slung on the crane with a chain. The lighting's not the best, so I've got my ring light on the back to try and show you what I've done. So I've got it up here, I've got a rag just to protect the front cam cover with the paint, and also to stop it from cracking. And then on the back, there's a little lifting hook which I've got the chain onto. So hopefully we can lift it off the engine, get it down on the mat, and then get the gearbox on it. So I realised it was a lot easier to lift the engine and stand, and then slide the stand off the engine whilst it's in the air, than to try and slide the engine off the stand whilst the stand was on the floor. So now that the engine's down on the floor, that's the first time it's been off that stand for 2.5 years. So now we need to get this back plate off, which is with those 4 19mm bolts, and then we'll get that plate off. We can get the gearbox bolted to it after getting the flywheel and the clutch on. Fitting the flywheel is very simple. As long as the flywheel is flat against the crank and you know it's flush and all your bolts are in and they're all nice and tight so it doesn't come off when you start the engine, you know you've done it properly. So now the flywheel's on and I've match marked the bolts, but it's annoyed me the way I haven't done it properly all the way around the same. But anyway, here's the clutch, and in the box you get a new throw bearing, which is what this is. Grease, I'm assuming, for when you're lining the spline up. We are. Spline hub grease, that's what that is. And we have a clutch plate, which is the friction disc that goes between the flywheel and the spring plate. Ooh, jellies. It's little things, eh? And there's the spring plate. So let's get this on. If you look at the friction disc on the clutch, you'll see that it has to go in a certain way, and that's because on one side you have a marking which says T/M. That means transmission. So what that means is that side's got to face the gearbox, because if you put it on the other way around, I don't think it'll actually bolt on because of how big the spring pack is on the clutch plate. So we'll get that on the right way around and then we can get the spring plate on. So technically the assembly is on, but before I tighten any of those bolts all around it, you can probably see on the inside, the clutch disc isn't centered with the flywheel. So the only way I can do that, really, because I don't have a sensing tool, is to use my 12mm Allen key socket bit on the end of an extension. And what I can do is, because that moves about, I can get it in, get the 12mm in the hole of the flywheel, and hold it so it's fairly centered, and tighten everything else down. Now that it's all tight, you can see it's not that far off really. I think the gearbox will pull the rest of that back in. Speaking of gearboxes, we're at that point now where we can get it off the stand and get it onto the engine. Before we fit the gearbox, we need to fit the new throttle bearing. So what this does is this bearing presses against the springs on the clutch, but because the clutch is spinning, the bearing also needs to spin. So as it's putting forward pressure on the springs, it's spinning at the same time, so changing this now is definitely a must. Now the new throttle bearing's on, it's time to get this on that. Fitting a clutch is never easy, and especially when it comes to getting the gearbox back on, but this gearbox weighs an absolute ton. So after a lot of faffling around and wiggling it about, I finally got the splines to line up and the box went on. So after faffling around the gearbox for quite a while, it just wouldn't go on and I couldn't figure out why. It turns out the back and plate wasn't on the dial properly, so fixed that, got the box on, now we can get it in the car. Now although this engine bay looks massive, when the engine's in and all the ancillaries and the components that make the engine work are in as well, it becomes very tight, very quick. So getting the engine back in isn't an easy task because you've got to line it up with 4 different engine mounts, whilst trying to make sure you're not crushing anything and everything lines up. But eventually I got it in, it just took a while. Well, it's 11:40 p.m, so technically today was the day that the engine went in, because there it is, sitting pretty in the engine bay. I still need to get the front and rear engine mount bolts in because they're a bit awkward to do. But in all honesty, I think I massively underestimated how much work that was actually going to be. But it's a huge milestone for the GTO and it's a big step forward. So next, realistically, there's all that wiring loom to go onto the engine and the gearbox as well. And then all there is all of your vacuum lines. So all them vacuum lines need plugging in as well. But that is definitely not going to be a job I'm going to do tonight, because like I said, it's 20 to 12 and I have neighbours, so I need to leave. So that's going to be it for this video, guys. The engine is in the GTO and I'm tired, but I'm happy that we finally got it in, because like I said, it's a huge milestone. So if you liked what you've seen today, remember to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notifications bell so you get an update every time I post a video, and I'll see you in the next one.
Do you lie awake at night? Are you afraid to turn out the lights? Is there